This morning, we are here for Being Culturally Informed, Translating Concepts to Action. Our presenters are Dr. Deanna Harris-McCoy and Dr. Ty Strawn-Louisdor. I'd like to do just a brief introduction this morning. Dr. Harris-McCoy is the Chief Executive Officer of Conscious Decisions Family Therapy Services. She brings more than 10 years of clinical experience as an LMFT, and she's an Associate Professor and Marriage and Family Therapy Program Director at Northern Illinois University. Her research focuses on Black mental health, adolescence, and social justice within the field of marriage and family therapy. Dr. Ty Strawn-Louisdor is the Assistant Director of Communications and Outreach at Duke University Counseling and Psychological Services. She also serves as a staff clinician at Duke. Her research includes increasing representation and engagement of minorities utilizing mental health services, increasing representation of minorities as mental health providers, and increasing cultural competence and awareness in trainings and clinical settings. She's also a former AMFT Minority Fellow. We are so glad to have you both here this morning. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you all for having us, and good morning. I'm so excited to be here with you all. Before we get started, we do have just a few disclaimers. One of them is a personal one, very important, near and dear to my heart. If at any time throughout this presentation you hear that I am speaking a little bit too rapidly, please feel free to let us know, let me know. I want to make sure that you're getting everything here. But more importantly, might be missing the screen, but this is a liberated space. We want everyone to be able to take part and join the conversation. Learning is essential. Point blank period. Learning is essential for growth. However, it can sometimes be uncomfortable when it challenges preconceived notions we may hold. We would like this to be a space where you feel comfortable to ask questions, share your ideas, and grow with one another.
And we also have some assumptions and suggestions for you all throughout this presentation today. And one of our assumptions is that everyone is here to better help the families that you serve. And since we know that you all are very passionate about the families that you serve, we also have the assumption that everyone is willing to make some change to better help those families that you serve. So at some level, we're just going to take the ego out of this just for this training today. And then a suggestion that we have is when you feel discomfort, really ask yourself, how is this challenging the power that I have and the power that I want to keep? So if at any point in time, the terms that we talk about or some of the change that we talk about kind of feels uncomfortable or doesn't really sit right with you, really ask yourself this question. And so here is our agenda for today. We're going to talk about some commonly used terms that we use just so that we can be all on the same page about what we're going to talk about throughout the webinar today. Then we're going to talk about first, second, and third order change, define it, which is the abstract part, and then talk about how you all can concretely use it with families, with direct service workers, with clinicians, within leadership and administration, and within the overall organization. And then we're going to have time for question and answers. But as I mentioned earlier, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put it in the Q&A. If there's things that you really want to talk about, feel free to put it in the chat because we're going to be monitoring both of those. So some of you all have had some homework earlier. So we have 2 poll questions for you that we are going to launch. And the first one is, did you complete the personal values worksheet? And if you did, how easy was it to complete? Like very easy, a little easy, you're like, maybe, or not so easy at all. And I am aware that some of you all did not receive the personal value worksheet. So it's going to be dropped in the chat for you now that you can complete after the webinar. So we're just going to give people a little bit of time to answer some of these questions. And I'm gonna write down these percentages too. We'll give it maybe like 20, 30 more seconds. Okay, I think we have it. So, okay, I'll share the results with you all. So it seems like most people did not complete the personal values worksheet that you had beforehand, and then for those that did complete it, it was kind of Majority of people said it was like to complete, and so we'll come back to the reasoning for the personal values worksheet at the end of the webinar today. But thank you for those that actually completed it. We'll talk about how that interacts with what we're going to discuss today. Let's go and talk about some of the terms so we can be all on the same page. And the first one is oppression. And I think that oftentimes we think of oppression in this really large, abstract way as dictators or authoritarian figures, but it also influences our everyday life. So I really love this definition of oppression, that it refers to the vast and deep injustices some groups suffer as consequences of often unconscious assumptions and reactions of well-meaning people in ordinary interactions, media, and cultural stereotypes, and structural features of bureaucratic hierarchies and market mechanisms. And I think about this as one of my previous professors shared with us that oppression is really just like the smog that we all breathe it in. And part of our job is to figure out how we just do not perpetuate it, because we know that we're always ingesting it. It's internalized for us, and then we have to be cognizant of it so we don't perpetuate it in our everyday lives. And the next is equality, which everyone receives the same amount of resources, access, education, and opportunities, regardless of their individual need. And then opposite of that would be inequality. The distribution of resources is unbalanced, allowing some individuals to receive more than others. And I would imagine that a lot of you all have seen the picture demonstrating the differences between equality and how that's not necessarily enough, because then people talk a lot about the equity. And that's the consideration is made based on differences between individuals to accurately estimate the amount of resources, access, education, and opportunities each person needs. And so we're considering people in their context and what they need to be whole. Inequity, on the other hand, is an unfair and unjust distribution of resources. The distribution may be quantifiably be exactly the same, which is part of that, equality that we're thinking about for each person, but yet dismisses the agency of the individuals. Then we're thinking about those in the dominant group, and that's a group of people that are systematically, and that's the key word, systematically advantaged by society because of group membership. On the opposite side, you have those in a minority, subordinate or targeted groups, and it's a group of people that are systematically disadvantaged by society because of group membership. And then when we take those dominant groups and those targeted groups together, we're thinking about people's social location. And that's the intersection of privilege and oppression tied to being a member of a dominant or targeted groups. So, for example, my race and my gender would put me in a targeted group. However, my education would put me in a dominant group. And so I have varying levels of power and privilege depending on the environment that I'm in based on my status in dominant and targeted groups. So it's never just an either or, it's usually a both and. And I really love this quote by Patricia Hill Collins that helps us really look at social location, that once we realize that there are few pure victims or oppressors, and that each one of us derives varying amounts of penalty and privilege from the multiple systems of oppression that frame our lives, then we will be in a position to see the need for new ways of thought and action. And hopefully that's what you all will get from our webinar today, is a different way of thinking and then a different way of being and acting. So let's talk about this first, second, and third order change. I absolutely love these concepts. I talk about them almost like every day. It's part of who I am, and I talk about it with my students and my clients. I love it, and I hope that you really enjoy it too. So when we talk about change itself, we really have to think about the system. We're not really talking about, in the context of this webinar, we're not talking about individuals per se, but we're talking about the system in and of itself. And we're talking about systems' tendency towards stability, which is our homeostasis. And I think we can look at stability more as levels of comfort or our norm. And for the sake of this webinar, we are thinking about how culturally informed we are. So as you can see over here, we have this wonderful thermometer. And when it is very, very low, it is being culturally ignorant. When it is very, very high or hot, we're being culturally informed. So for the sake of this example, our stability, our level of comfort, our homeostasis is at 23 degrees. That is where we are going to feel comfortable right now with how we are using culture in our everyday practices. And so our goal is to make our stability or our comfort or our homeostasis more culturally informed. We want to change the way that we interact with people. It's not that we just want to change the individuals itself, but we want to change the environment in which we work. We want to change how the system itself operates. And so for a first order change in general, it's focusing on negative feedback. And negative feedback is not negative in a sense that it's bad. That's not the connotation that we're talking about. It's more of our actions, our reactions, our responses. They maintain our system. So that level of comfort that we engage in, the norm, our typical operation, it stays the same. So when there are external stressors or even internal ones, when there are oppressive actions, discriminatory actions that happen, and then we have like this knee-jerk reaction to do something, that's negative feedback. We really feel like we have to do something to make our system more culturally informed, to make it anti-oppressive. What are we going to do? Let's actually do something. And that's immediate, superficial solutions. However, they don't necessarily change the way that we actually operate. And so first order changes are necessary and not enough. So we don't want to say don't make first order changes. Make the first order changes because they're necessary and they're not enough. So as you can see from our handy dandy thermometer over here, even though we're acting, we're doing something to be more culturally informed, we're not really changing our system itself. We are still functioning at 23 degrees. And if you want to, you can go back to your administrators, leaders, and organizations and say, you know what? We are still functioning at 23 degrees. And they may not understand what you're saying, but you'll get it. And then you can explain all this to them. So in essence, our homeostasis just does not change at all. But again, I don't want you all to think that when we talk about the first order changes with the various groups that they're not necessary. We have to do some of the first order changes and they're not enough. So Second order changes focuses on positive feedback. And again, positive, not in the connotation of good. It's more about the responses and our reactions and our actions are actually changing our system itself. We are changing the way that we interact with the families that we serve. We're changing the way that we interact with each other. We are changing the system itself. So as you can see again from our handy dandy thermometer over here, that our level of comfort of being culturally informed has increased to 54 degrees. And so this then means that whatever happens with whatever there's some external stressors, or if we get new staff agencies, if we have new families come to our agency that we haven't had before, that have a different lived experience or a different cultural background, that we're able to manage them because we have increased our level of comfort with being culturally informed. So it's not going to shock us any. We're not going to go back to our 23 degrees of what we didn't know anything. We are comfortable with this increased level of being culturally informed, and it's how we're going to operate is in those 54 degrees. So there's a shift in our level of comfort. And hopefully that's part of what we're going to help you all start doing is shifting your level of comfort, shifting what comes back to be your norm in and of itself, because we want being culturally informed just to be a norm for you, to be your level of comfort, and instead of it being something that's uncomfortable and you might shy away from. So third order change, although conceptually is not a new term, especially for systemic thinkers or marriage and family therapists, and especially people from historically marginalized groups in this country, we're always thinking about what culture means to us. We're always thinking about oppression. We're always thinking about, because it directly affects our lives. So we cannot not think about it. But the term itself in some of the use is relatively new, even though the idea of it is not new. And third order thinking requires individuals to expand the meta view of their participation with families to more intentionally include the impact of societal systems and power dynamics, as well as collective meaning making and culture. So as you can see from our thermometer, we are moving up to 87 degrees now because we are being culturally informed, and that is our level of comfort. We're really thinking about the barriers to some of the families that we serve. We're thinking about some of their cultural traditions. We're thinking about our policies and our procedures. We are really making culture and being culturally informed the center of what we do. So we are questioning everything and all of our decisions and thinking about who it serves, who's being left out. So it's part of all of our thinking. And hopefully we can get to a place where we move towards third order change. But I also want to say it again, that the first order change is necessary and not enough. And we really hope that people can move towards third order changes in their lives. And so here's the next poll question. Based on this definition of it, what stage of change do you actively practice now? And so we'll give you all a minute or so to answer it. Oh, getting much more participation for this question. And I'm also going to write this down here too. No, and it's still going. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. And it seemed like a majority of people are at second order change. And I'm like, oh, do we even really need to do this webinar? Because you all seem like you might already have it. So for those that are at first order changes and those that are at third order changes, salute to some of you all, and hopefully we can move you to a different level of change. And if you're in the third order, that you take something with you that you can maintain some of this third order of change. All right, let's close this out.
Awesome. So let's look at change in families. Uh-oh. Sorry, my computer seems to lag here. Okay. Families function as emotional and relationship systems. And family members influence and are influenced by one another at individual, dyadic, systemic, and intergenerational levels. And this quote is shared with us by Bowen. So when we're working with families, family members commonly report how they can feel disconnected or distant from one another, but that actually isn't fully the case. The truth is that it is the nature of families to be connected emotionally. And we see this when we're assessing how the family's rules, roles, and norms can influence each member's thoughts, actions, and their feelings. So in this sense, we can say that families are a system. Okay, families are a system made up of different parts. And when there is an issue with one of the parts, it not only impacts the entire system, and so you see that ripple effect going through, but it's also a reflection of an issue or imbalance in the larger family system. And we'll talk about that part a little later. Also, while families are always experiencing some type of change, family systems have features that maintain their homeostasis, so that resistance. So when something happens to change what's the norm for them, and it challenges the family's rules that were already set in place, the family resists and they try to keep things the same. Additionally, family systems and the various environments and networks that they are situated in, they affect the relational and emotional development of its members. A nice way to illustrate this concept is with Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. Let's take a look at it. So as a refresher, ecological systems theory framework was developed in 1979 by Yuri Bronfenbrenner. It asserts that all human development is a process of interaction and interdependence between biology, social worlds, and the environment, which is to say that people are the products of both not only genes, but their environments in which they live. So here in the center, we have the identified client. This person is probably the person who has come into your office, and they are the symptom bearer of the family. The first system that we get to, though, is a microsystem. And these are the folks who usually have the most influence, the most affect on the client directly. Next, we have the mesosystem. So these are the connections between the people around the client. So that can be the, if we're talking about child here, we're looking at parents with teachers, teachers with peers and such. And then we have the exosystem. And then these are the links between the social systems that the client isn't necessarily situated in directly, but there are things that take place within that system that still can manage to trickle down and have some type of influence. So again, if we were looking at this with a child, this would be a father with his boss, peers with their parents, the attitudes they take there, and the attitudes that they then bring towards the client. And then we have the macro system, the overarching culture, religion, and social norms that influences all of the other systems around the client. And the last piece that was added to this model is the chronosystem. And so above all, it is the dimension of time. It describes historical time, but it also the changes that occur over an individual's lifetime, whether it's personal, cultural, or historical events that have taken place. So we'll look at this more closely in a second. Let's check out our first little work in action. So you have the Newcomb family. This file hits your desk, and this is the information that you get. Riley Newcomb, 28, born in Trinidad, but moved to the US at the age of 8. She identifies as Christian, specifically of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. And for those who do not know what that is, Seventh-day Adventism practices the Sabbath from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, and their church services normally take place on that Saturday. Also, if you've grown up in a Seventh-day Adventist household, you know there was also with that Sabbath celebration, there is no TV, no outside, anything that can be described as secular. Everything is put forth. So this is what her life is like. She's now currently employed as an elementary school teacher, and she has a working class background, single parent home. So her parents have a job. Her parents divorced when she was about 10, I believe. She just grew up with her mom. She now has one child, Lily, who is 6. She's in the 1st grade at a private SDA institution. And they've been mandated to services. Well, Riley has been mandated to services due to multiple reports of family violence. Some reports have been made by community members. A report was made by Riley's mom. The last report being made by an instructor at Lily's school due to seeing bruising on Riley's arms when she came to pick Lily up. But also in a play session, Lily disclosed to her friend and the teacher overheard that her and her mom had been sleeping in their car. So then when you first see Lily, you know, that first contact, your intake. This is the information you gather. She's been married for 7 years. To Jeremiah, who's 30. He was born in the US, but he is also of Caribbean descent, Christian, Seventh-day Adventist. He is currently unemployed. He had plans to be a boxer. And actually, before meeting Riley, he was pretty well known in the amateur circuit. Middle-class background, dual-parent home. They actually ended up getting married because while they were dating, Riley ended up pregnant. And for their religious beliefs, a child should not be brought into out of wedlock. And so they had to get married. And they both described it as like a shotgun backyard wedding. They are living in the house with their in-laws, specifically Jeremiah's parents. There's a tense relationship. A mother-in-law will frequently tell Riley that she trapped her son in his dreams. She's the reason that Jeremiah is not doing the things he's doing. Jeremiah displays bursts of aggression and rage. Riley reports this, that he will physically lash out towards her. And they have gotten into a few physical altercations. And while he has never violently assaulted Lily, he has forcibly removed her and Lily from the home. And one of his rages, locked them out. The mother-in-law did not help, anything like that. So they were looking for shelter, which is how they ended up sleeping in the car. And she also shared that divorce is not an option because it goes against their beliefs. So before we even get into the work with the family, let's just start by taking a look at how we can conceptualize this family in their respective system. So in the middle, we have the client Riley. Like we said, the person who comes in is generally the symptom bearer of the family, but as we learn when it comes to family systems, the symptom bearer is just showing that there are other signs of discomfort and imbalance in the whole family system. And so then we have the microsystem around Riley. So who is directly affected by Riley? Who does Riley directly affect? Lily, Jeremiah, her in-laws. These are the folks she sees in the house. Now, her mom does not live in the house with them. However, they have a very close relationship, and to the point where they speak on the phone on a regular basis. And so I put them in with the microsystem. All right, and then we have the mesosystem. And remember, that mesosystem is the connections that are taking place. So these are the connections that we have around Riley. We have Lily and Jeremiah, her father. We have Jeremiah and his parents, Lily and her paternal grandparents. So Jeremiah's parents, Jeremiah and Riley's mom. Because we do know if you're married, you know your in-laws do sometimes have something to say about your significant other. That's just how it goes. Then you have Lily and her maternal grandmother, and I put the parents in quotations because then you have the both sets of parents. So these are all the social connections that we have around Riley. And so while Riley is not directly situated in that environment per se, how those folks connect do serve to influence and affect her. And then we have the exosystem, another system where Riley is not directly situated in, but it can impact her. And so for this one, let's look at the failed job interviews. Part of the rage that Jeremiah experiences is when he knows that he either bombed an interview or she says that he'll report that he didn't do well or he got turned down from the job. That's when she notices an increase in the anger, right? Riley wasn't at that interview, but what took place during that interview still serves to impact them at home when he takes out his frustrations on her and Lily. And then we have Lily's interactions with her teacher, right? A conversation with Lily's teacher, just something overheard by Lily's teacher brought this case to your desk. That impact that's there. And then we have the religious beliefs in that microsystem and the culture involved, right? So what is it to be of Caribbean descent, right? What is it? What are some of the norms and roles that both Jeremiah and Riley have been socialized into? And what are they doing in their homes? What does it mean for them to be Seventh-day Adventists? How are they carrying this out? How does that impact the behaviors that they demonstrate towards each other, the behaviors that they demonstrate in problem solving, and such? And then last but not least, we have the chronosystem, which remembers about time. And so these are the things that took place in Riley's life over time. Pregnancy, marriage, in-laws moving in, that could be quite a shift. Jeremiah losing his job, the things that have happened over time, but it can kind of serve as an index for this was what my life was like before, and this is what my life was like after. Sorry, y'all. So let's look at what first, second, and third order change for direct service workers and clinicians look like. And this is going to be very general, and then we'll get into it. But first, the work that we do still has a very large customer service base. And so before we can even talk about the things that we want to do with the client system, there are some things we need to do when we internally check ourselves, right? And so my attitude influences my behavior, which therefore influences your attitude, then influences your behavior. And then it sets us back on this cycle. We are what we bring into the room. And so I just like to insert this for us to know a large part of doing the change process, and especially reaching that third order change, is about the attitudes that we hold, how it comes out in our behaviors. Starting the evaluation from there. So first order change with direct service professionals. And as we mentioned, that first order change gives you some leeway with the person, but it may not necessarily impact their entire system, but it may change how you work with them just a little bit, maybe, or how they view you. But first order change, we have that educating yourself on the presenting issues of the families you serve. It's always good to know who you're bringing into the room. Good to know just a little bit about the issues surrounding them, right? Posting signage that honors diversity and equity. so that when a person walks into your building and your room, they feel like they're welcome here. And compassionately offering appropriate solutions. May not necessarily change what's going on around them, but hey, you did something, right? Like you helped, you offered some type of solution. And so when we look at clinicians, acknowledge the necessity of being culturally informed. And so this is that first step that we all take when we're in our coursework. And it's like, oh, in order for me to actually be successful in this work, I need to have an awareness of certain things. I need to be more aware. I need to see how it influences me, right? That first step when you acknowledge, okay, that's what I need to do. Not that you did it, but you know it's something you need to do. And then asking colleagues with marginalized identities for techniques to discuss oppression. This, for me, is a first order change. For me, this is a first order change in that you are doing something. We're asking someone to help us, teach us, but we haven't yet made the steps to get there. That's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you just need that quick conversation. And then asking clients about their various identities without using that information. And so this is when we have that intake form in front of us and we ask our clients about their different backgrounds, which is great. But when we're looking at the problems, when we're starting to see maybe how they came to be in our office, what about their lives brought them this way, we don't really take any of that into account. And so second order change, having courageous conversations. And so now stepping out, starting to be slightly more vulnerable and seeing what you can learn. Implementing practices that can assist consumers in reaching their desired outcomes. And again, we'll see an example of this later on, but the idea that you're starting to develop some type of policy or structure to put in place to help consumers in your work be able to maybe make it to sessions on time or make it to sessions at all, or be able to make the most of the sessions while they're there. For clinicians, being comfortable with not being the expert in the room. And so when we went back, we said that first step was acknowledging that we need to have a bit more cultural awareness, right? And so when we're in this step, it's acknowledging and knowing that the client that's in front of us kind of knows more about their lives than we do. Yes, we may have the tools and skills, but they know more about what impacts them and being willing to hear that. Be an advocate for non-prejudicial language. So definitely stopping any slurs that may be said, being an advocate for that not being used at all in the client's presence or in the setting at all. Learning correct terms and being willing to be corrected as well. And then incorporating culturally relevant theories, materials, and clinical practices. It's always nice to work from a more culturally aware lens. And these are some things you can do, such as culturally responsive therapy, critical race theory, relational cultural theory, and cultural genograms. And even, I would say a good start is Rothenbrenner's ecological systems theory, right? It takes you just from looking at, the structure, the hierarchy, but also forces you to examine, okay, how is this client situated? What about the areas around them? Okay, now let's see, what about this relationship, even though the client isn't in it, still impacts them. So being able to still look at their background, look at the environment and see what they bring into the room. And then we start to think about third order change. And so to have a socioculturally attuned practice, it is a practice that is aware and responsive to the intersections of societal context, culture, and power, and client experience in position to promote equity. And so in order for us to become these socioculturally attuned clinicians and individuals, there are a few steps that we have to do. First is, when we go back to that first slide, my attitude influences my behavior and then influences your attitude and your behavior. We have to acknowledge our identities and the stories we carry about ourselves and others. Really taking some time to say, okay, this is who I am. This is how I've been positioned. These are my others. This is why I framed them as my othered. Let's go from here. Be aware of the power dynamics and their flow in nature. And I believe Dr. Harris-McCoy gave a really good example of that at the beginning, of being Black and being a woman, but also being in a university setting and holding power, having a certain level of education, right? And so knowing that in some settings, your clients may be very marginalized, actually, they may identify as marginalized, but in some other aspects of their lives, they hold quite a bit of power. What does that mean for them? And then what does that mean for you? How do you perceive that? And then also being able to engage with clients within the framework of their sociocultural realities. Profit Brenner, I'm telling you, it's the best way to go, right? So learning what it is that surrounds them and using that as a frame for your work. A good way to do that, asking questions such as how might this experience in your life influence you? What was it like for you growing up in this neighborhood? You say that you've learned to not trust men because of men whom you were in community with. What happened in those circumstances that influenced you? Learning where they've been. And we might be actually a little, slides are going a little backwards, but that's okay. We can do this. And so when we're talking about Thor order change for direct service professionals, part of what that is understanding the connections between societal power, privilege, and oppression. And so how we acknowledge those identities that we hold, and how the stories that we told ourselves about ourselves and others, how that influences the folks around us. And then another way is critiquing and changing office practices. And so what are the things that you can advocate for? What are the things that you notice that could be barriers to your clients receiving care? And then for clinicians, attuning to context and power. And so discerning the experiential, emotional, relational impact of society on the client system, being curious about the power dynamics in the client's lives, and recognizing that those power dynamics shift across contexts, naming injustices through questions that affirm that person's lived experiences, call out what it is. Call out what it is. And naming injustices and value what is minimized go hand in hand, because how many times have we ourselves even minimize what we've been going through because in comparison, it's not as bad, or someone else is going through worse, right? Value what is minimized. Intervening in power dynamics and being willing to interrupt inequities when they are witnessed. Sometimes this may look like Colin says, you name an injustice in the room, calling out poor behavior when you see it in public, being able to stand on that. And then promoting shared responsibility and accountability. The work that we do with our clients, and I think this is how I view that, the work that we do with our clients is not just the work of me, right? It's the work of everyone in this building, in this system. How are we supporting everyone? What are we doing ourselves? Envisioning just alternatives. So providing a space for your clients to imagine what a just relational alternative is. And I think about this from a narrative standpoint. What are the stories that the client has told themselves about their lives? What is the story that they can help to reauthor? How can you help reauthor that story for them? And then start collaborating with them to make it a reality. In what ways can you advocate for this client? In what ways can you show up for them, both in and out the room? In what ways can you start to change things in your personal life? So let's consider this, and we're going to go back to the Newcomb family. Riley and Jeremiah have one vehicle, and they live in an area that is not supported by public transportation. Riley has been very inconsistent when attending her individual sessions, and when she does come, she has Lily with her quite a bit. During therapy, she presents as irritated and distracted. And sessions are often interrupted by Lily knocking on the door and asking for food. Additionally, you notice there is resistance whenever you broach the subject of her marriage. When you ask about her irritation, Riley responds that there are budget cuts happening at her school and she will be unemployed by the end of the month. In a team meeting, though, you learn that her disposition is completely different, a 180 in the couple family sessions. Her and Jeremiah are on time, and she is reportedly enthusiastic to fix things within her family. It is also shared that they are experiencing food insecurity, financial instability, of course, since Riley will be unemployed. Jeremiah does not have a job as of yet. And Riley has been heavily reliant on church members for help with Lily. And so just in thinking about the information that we got in the beginning and this information here, let's think about what does change look like at the different levels. I will note that this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some things that could work. So for a direct service professional or first order change, getting that at least some contact with the client. Encourage Riley to check out the rideshare options in her area, right? And share tips on how to find discount codes because that could be beneficial. Compiling a list of childcare options so that Lily has some place to go while Riley is there and she can actually partake in the sessions. And reminding Riley to inform the office when she is running behind. So in some ways, this does cause some change, right? Riley is given resources on what can help make her experience better as she works through and processes through this mandated session she has. For a clinician, this can look like preparing for the initial session by reading Riley's file. That could seem venial, but I can't tell you how many clinicians actually do not read a file before they see a client. I've heard the different reasons, but it does help to know who their identities are. Asking a coworker who also identifies as Caribbean to brief you on the culture. So kind of preparing yourself to know, okay, what does it mean for Riley? What is she bringing into the room with her? And during the session, encourage Riley to develop a plan on finding a new source of income once she shares that she's going to be without a job, right? Because we encourage, we show compassion. This is what she can do. When we're looking at second order change, one option then, as we move through the process, having snacks and activities on hand to keep Lily engaged while Riley is in session. And so while it is different, it was still helpful to have childcare options. This also provides Lily with something to do while Riley is in a session and take some of the financial strain off of Riley. Somehow, and in some way, it can influence her disposition when she's in the space, her disposition when she goes home, her disposition in the session, and such. And then we have second order change for a clinician, naming and validating the frustration Riley feels about losing her job, right? Really sitting in that space with her, calling it out, not letting it be minimized by, well, the budget cuts are happening everywhere. I should have known this was happening. But let's talk about the injustice of it. Teachers are needed everywhere. That means they're wonderful. And invite Riley to dialogue about her thoughts on how her identities influence her view on unemployment. So what is it for her to be a Caribbean woman? What are the roles that she is supposed to play in her household to support her child and her husband, right? And we know that some of these things were discussed in the third order change, but we haven't reached third order change just yet because you need all of them to really be able to say that you've reached that sociocultural attuned practice. And so when we're looking at direct service professionals, advocating for on-site childcare. So now not only have you compiled resources, you provided snacks and things for Lily to play with in the session so that Riley has one less stress on her hand, but now you're taking it one step further to say, okay, many of our clients may not be able to afford childcare out here. What are we supposed to do when they still need to come here? What can be done? How can we help do this? I'll propose and advocate for partnerships with transportation companies and food pantries. Having snacks within the space is great, but what happens when they go home? Like I said, we mentioned there's some food insecurity present. How can we help them? And then third order change for a clinician, working with the direct service professionals to advocate for changes. I always think it's great when everyone in the building has the same message to give to higher up administration, right? Like we need this, let's do this. Direct service professionals see it on this side, clinicians see it here, we're working together, we need this. Employing a cultural genogram to gather information and guide dialogue on Riley's experience of the world. And with that, being able to start naming some of the injustices that she has, seeing what she's minimizing, looking at power. How do power dynamics play out in her life? How are they playing out in her relationship? And then conceptualizing how the roles, rules, and norms of Riley's system may contribute to her current positioning. How are women viewed in her culture and religion? And name and gently challenge themes of patriarchy and blind submission, which is something I would not say do until you have a really good relationship with the client foremost, but it is one of those things that allows clients to interrupt the narrative that they have on their life, but then start imagining what a relational alternative can look like.
Let's talk about first order change in leadership and administration. I don't know if you all are have watched The Office, but I feel like Michael Scott is like the quintessential first order change leader. He tries to be culturally informed, but it just comes off as a microaggression. It comes off as a little discriminatory, but he tries. And I feel like that's like a quintessential first order change leader. And so part of that is buying your staff inclusive paraphernalia. So we know that today is the first day of Black History Month. So you may have the posters up, you may have given them shirts and t-shirts and buttons, and we do all of our rainbow and pride paraphernalia in June. And like I said earlier, with the first order change, sometimes it's necessary and it's not enough. Hiring culturally diverse staff without change in culture. And so because of some external changes, some things that happen in that macro system, every organization is looking at the people in their leadership, looking at their staff and figuring out, do we have a diversity of voices here? Do we have people that look different? Do we have people that have different lived experiences? And we're going to hire people that don't necessarily look like us, that don't have the same lived experiences, because we need diversity of thought and culture in our organization. And yet you then bring them into your organization, but do not change your culture. Like we talked about before, the homeostasis, that level of comfort with being culturally informed just stays the same. So your staff is still feeling like, your new staff are still feeling like outsiders in this organization. They don't feel included at all. But you made a change while bringing new people onto the staff. Implementing mandatory diversity trainings, again, without follow-up. The information is necessary to move that thermometer up to being more culturally informed, but yet what are we actually going to do with the data? What changes are we actually going to make in your interaction with the staff and the staff interaction with your families? Because if we're going to get the information and just check the box that we completed this training, we completed the webinar, but don't actually go back and make any changes, and that also means you as a leader making any changes, then it's not really worth a lot at all. So again, it's something. We did something, but we haven't changed the culture of our organization. We haven't changed our level of comfort at all. And then this is also like a tricky one, placing historically marginalized people in this country on ADEI committees at some level. We want people that have the expertise to be on the committee. And at the same time, if you're going to place people on the committees, ask them first if they want to be on the committee before you're saying, oh, you look like you're from this historically marginalized community. you should be on this committee. So then that means that they then have to do the emotional work, the emotional labor of educating everybody about oppression, and they still have to do their job. So if you're going to ask someone to be on a committee, also then think about, what am I going to take off their to-do list so I don't burn them out? So it's a tricky thing, because we want people with the lived experience, with the shared experience, with the knowledge, but we also don't want people to be the only ones that are representing this historically marginalized community in this country, to be the spokesperson for everyone else, and other people not having to do the research, getting the knowledge, the information to educate others. So what does second order change look like in leadership? Addressing and condemning prejudice as you see it. I know that many people have policies from HR about some of this, but it does not necessarily mean that you are following some of those policies. And so if you're seeing microaggressions, if you are seeing prejudicial comments, if you're seeing discriminatory behaviors from your staff, and that's the staff to other staff members, if you're seeing from other leaders to staff, if you're seeing from staff to families, you need to address it immediately and condemn it. We can't just sweep it under the rug and say, well, you know, so-and-so was just joking. Well, you know that someone is not really like that. They're not sexist, they're not classist, they're not racist. That's not what you still have to address it, and you still have to condemn it, and people have to have consequences for their actions. Also, giving employees the space to propose new behaviors, policies, because your staff has knowledge, they have expertise that they are sharing, and they can share with you to help move that needle towards being more culturally informed. And we also want to give them the support to execute those policies and procedures, and anything that they want to propose that the organization has agreed to, give them support to do so. So if we're going to hire culturally diverse staff, if we're going to increase the cultural diversity in our organizations, make people feel welcomed and feel like they belong. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is this third order level of change within leadership, is really analyzing the self of the leader and your leadership style. And two of the leadership styles that I really, really enjoy and think align with being more culturally informed, and that I also practice myself, are authentic leadership and inclusive leadership. So the authentic leadership, it is really about you operating as your most authentic self to help and create environments where your staff can also be their most authentic self and be celebrated. And it starts with self-awareness. So this knowing your strengths, it's also knowing your weaknesses. It's about knowing your values, knowing who you are, and being confident in who you are. And I think of like this self-awareness part as some of the training that I had to go through in my master's program. We did a year of this person of the therapist training, where we really had to dig deep and analyze our family history. We had to think about all of our baggage that we were holding and how that could potentially influence the clients that we were working with, and how it influences how we relate to other people. Because sometimes other people can trigger us and we're not cognizant of it. So we might project all of our stuff onto them, and it influences our relationship with them. And so part of that is being aware of you, realizing when a person you're interacting with is triggering some stuff from your own background that has nothing to do with that person, but your response may be negative in that sense. And so that's not what we want. So part of that self-awareness is really helpful. And I'm in the process of developing like a self-awareness, self of the leader training to help leaders really dig deep so they can be more authentic leaders and create better relationships with the people that work with them. And the second part is this internalized moral perspective. And so part of authentic leadership is realizing that you then are on this track for justice. The anti-oppressive work is part of who you are. It's part of your core values, and you're really leading from that place of your core values. So when there's external stressors, when the world is gone a little batty, when there might be some bribery that might happen, that's not how you're going to operate, because you're still going to be true to your values. You have this internal moral compass that's going to help you lead your organization to a place where you all are proud of what you're doing, and you're still doing the anti-oppressive work. And the third part is this balanced processing. And so essentially that means that you can see the forest and the trees at the same time, that you can look at the micro and the macro of what's happening at your organization, what's happening with some of your staff, and you're open to hearing feedback from them in order to make some decisions. So you may not make knee-jerk decisions because you're getting all the information in order to make decisions that align not only with your moral compass, also with the organization's mission, vision, and values. And the last part is relational transparency, which I am all about. And it's part of what I said earlier, is like, we're going to take the ego out of some of this. The relational transparency is really taking the ego out of it, that you then can say, I messed up, I did this wrong, that I am not a perfect person, and I'm not expecting you all to be perfect, but I'm also expecting everybody, including myself, to be better. So you are operating as an actual human being to allow your staff to operate as a human being. So you're letting them know some of the things that you did well, some of the things that you didn't do too well, the things that you made a mistake on. So we're not going to act like that you're the perfect person, and we're not going to sweep under the rug anything that you did wrong. And that also means that you're open to critique from your staff, and you're not seeing it as a way of them trying to put you down, but a way to make the organization itself better. And the next part that I like is this inclusive leadership. I love these two styles of leadership. So inclusive leadership, while encapsulates diversity in its various forms, including characteristics that are both observable and unobservable within a social system, and recognizes such diversity as a means for achieving collective goals, inclusion requires that all individuals feel able to fully and meaningfully contribute to shared goals, regardless of group membership, and to do so without assimilating to established norms or relinquishing any part of their identity. And so this idea of inclusive leadership reminds me of this concept in our systemic thinking in marriage and family therapy called differentiation. And it allows an I and a we to exist at the exact same time. You can have both the I and the we, which I think is really necessary for leaders. You want people to feel included. You don't want anybody to feel like an outsider in your organization. So that also means that you then have to know who they are and know their strengths. And I think of inclusive leadership as one of the ways that I see myself as a leader. I like to think of myself as like a conductor. So we operate, whether that's like a symphony or a choir, we're operating as one voice and one sound. That's what people hear. But everybody, whether that it's the altos, the sopranos, the tenors, whether it's strings, whether that's the bass, whether it's the wind, everybody still has to operate at their best in order for us to have the best sound. So which means I then hired these people because I knew they had knowledge, skills, and talents. They have this lived experience that I really want. I'm not going to denigrate them. I'm not going to try to make them feel small. I'm not going to not hear them because I hired them for a reason. So I'm going to try to elevate them in what they're doing, because when they are shining and I think about somebody else and their strengths, and I put those two strengths together, then that just means that our organization is going to operate better. So again, it's having the I and the we at the same time. And part of the we is incorporating everybody's strengths in your organization. So instead of having people assimilate to this certain culture, it's about thinking about the strengths of the individual and how does that contribute to the strengths of the organization. So I think it's really helpful to go back and think about how you're including the I and the we in your organization and making sure that the people are still feeling like their individual ideas are valued. And I think it's really helpful, and I've seen this a lot, and I don't know if there's like this uptick in it, but I think as a leader that you then have to contextualize imposter syndrome, because often staff from historically marginalized communities, they may feel like that they do not belong. And again, we don't want them to feel like outsiders in our organizations. So having conversations with them about their knowledge, skills, and resources are really helpful. And it might be helpful as a leader or an administrator, realizing that they may have some anxiety. So you may have to help them navigate that in your workplace and potentially giving them like a lot of positive feedback to counter some of that imposter syndrome. And then putting it in the context of historical and present day oppression. Unfortunately, we still have so much present day oppression. So having conversations with your staff about how that is influencing their view of themselves, the way that they're doing their job, could be really, really helpful. And then deconstructing the meaning of professionalism, because it's not necessarily of what you look like, because that's a little classist sometimes. So it's really about what we know and not necessarily how we present sometimes. So having conversations about what professionalism looks like and means in your organization and looking at it from this anti-oppressive lens. We want to provide a whole bunch of positive feedback because again, there might be a lot of anxiety there. They may not think that they're doing a good job, even though they definitely are. So providing a lot of the positive feedback can help counter some of the imposter syndrome. So let's look at it within the organization itself. So for first order change in organizations, you might hire those in historically marginalized backgrounds in this country in leadership positions. And it seems like there is a pattern that organizations will maybe go to their board of directors and they're like, oh, again, there's a lot of things that are happening externally. There's this shift, and we may have to look at the cultural background and shared experiences of the people that are in leadership. But usually, BIPOC folks and women are hired into some of these leadership positions when organizations are in chaos, when they are already in shambles, when they are in the red. And so these people are expected now to save the organizations. You don't think about hiring them when the organization is thriving. It's really about when they need saving. And so we're really sometimes setting people up for failure when we're hiring. And then sometimes they don't necessarily have support. They don't have a lot of resources. And so we really have to think about when we're hiring BIPOC people and women in some of our organizations and what the organization structure looks like when we're doing so. And first order changes could also look like an organization being culturally blind, which means that we don't see differences in anything at all. We don't consider cultural influences. So all of the way that we engage with our families is universal, but universal really means the norms of the dominant culture. So not necessarily that we treat people equally, we treat people as we should based on this dominant culture. And can also look like cultural pre-competence, where we're understanding that the agency has some limitations. But again, we're making some of those superficial changes because there's this knee-jerk reaction to we have to do something to be more culturally informed. And if we're making second order changes in the organization, it looks like we're moving towards cultural competence, even though competence is a journey and not necessarily a destination. So that we're accepting differences. We're respecting differences. We're going back and doing assessment of our policies and procedures. That also means that you might have an advisory board for your community, and some of your constituents could include people that you serve. And you're actually taking their feedback into consideration instead of just having it as a check mark. And so people love a task force. I've realized that organizations love a good task force, and I am all about doing your due diligence and your research in decision-making. However, if you're having people be on a task force to make your organization more culturally informed, and they're spending all of this time in doing so, please actually implement the suggestions on the task force. Because I know sometimes the task force are used to keep people busy, so they don't necessarily make any changes, so their voices aren't heard. It's busy work to just pacify them. But if you're really trying to make changes in your, like real changes in your organization, actually implement the suggestions on the task force. And you may have to go back and think about your mission, your goals, your vision, and your core values, and to put some of this anti-oppressive language in your core values. So then in your hiring practices and your policies and procedures, people can go back to those core values, your mission, and your vision in reassessing and creating these new policies and procedures. And third order change looks like cultural proficiency. And like we said before, culture is not something that is at the margins. It's not an afterthought. It is something that you're considering while you're making every single decision in your organization. And not only do you hold it at high esteem, you might be adding to the literature itself. You might be adding to what's happening at your local government, and you're a place that they come to get ideas about how they can be more culturally informed. You're consistently using community voices, and it's not an us versus them. It's not that we're this organization that's coming to save people. We're an organization with resources, and we're going to figure out how we can use our resources to help the community. And the governing bodies should reflect the constituents that you serve, and not just like your leadership, but your board of directors too. And sometimes people can look the same, but not necessarily have the same lived experiences. So you also want to make sure that you have people on your board that also have some of those lived experiences, and that your leadership has some of those lived experiences. Because even though we may be anti-racist, even though we may be anti-homophobic and anti-transphobic, there's still like levels of classism that exist in some of the organizations that we might serve. So we always have to think about how some of our policies and procedures and the way that we interact and see people that may be a little classist. So then we can change some of our organizational assessments, again, that better align with maybe the new mission and values that we have. And then thinking about the policies that we have, which ones promote equity and access and which do not, which makes our staff feel included instead of excluded. What difference exists between those that create and implement policies and those that actually follow the policies? Because sometimes the leadership does not look like the people or have the same lived experiences as the people that you actually serve. So there's going to be a disconnect in some of those policies and procedures. And so your families might be saying, this is not working for me, because people just aren't getting it. And there are some obstacles about being more culturally informed that we hope that you can get through. So there's like this lack of awareness of the systemic and societal oppression, which I think that some of the terms that we talked about helps in that. And it's really just a fear, because folks don't want to, they don't want to lose some of the power and privilege that we have. There's some guilt and shame, but the guilt and shame, if we get stuck in it, stops us from actually moving and acting. And then we can be in compliant with some kind of systemic and social oppression, because at some levels we are privileged around being compliant with the system. And so hopefully you all will get that being culturally informed is really a lens in which you look and analyze the world. And it took time and intentional practice for you to naturally and organically do your current job. And so it's going to take time and intentional practice for you to be culturally informed. So although, again, the first order changes are necessary and more needs to happen, this also has to take time. And I know that when people are doing some of this work, they really want, what is it that I can do right now? So yes, sometimes we have to do action right now, but we also have to do the self-assessment, the analyzing before we can make some of those really changes in our comfort and our homeostasis. And that's where the personal values sheet comes in, because I think a lot of people, or at least the people that I've come in contact with when doing some of these workshops, they're like, I don't know what oppression and anti-oppression work looks like. I don't know what that actually means. But if we look at the values that we have in our own lives and how we act out those values, it's the same thing. And it's not necessarily that they don't know what it means to be anti-oppressive. It's like, I don't want to think about it and I don't want to lose my privilege. And so I think the personal value sheet helps you realize that, oh, you can take some of this into actual action once it becomes your personal value. And so hopefully being culturally informed will become a way of being for you, and a way that you view the world and a way that you interact with the world. And you can do it through this first, second, and third order change. So we want to thank you for being here and staying with us. I know that we have some questions in the Q&A, so we're going to go through some of those as well. The difference between the negative feedback and the positive feedback. So the negative and the positive is not the connotation of good or bad. It's really about, is your level of comfort, is your homeostasis changing? So with negative feedback, our level of comfort, our homeostasis, the way that our system just likes to be, does not change at all. We can do different behaviors, but that doesn't shift us to growing at all. And the positive feedback are those behaviors and the changes that and actions that actually shift our homeostasis. And in our systemic terms, the shift doesn't have to be in a place where we're moving towards like more cultural competence. The shift could be like, we're getting worse, but we don't want to focus on that shift. We want to focus on the shift of getting better. And so the first, second, and third order changes, although we're talking about systems itself and how systems make first and second order changes, I think that we can also personally make first and second order changes in our lives. So as systemic thinkers, even though it's frustrating to a lot of people, we usually work in the both and instead of the either or. So it doesn't have to be only the system or the individual. It can be both the individual and the system at all. Now I'm wondering, do we need other examples of the second and third order changes? And I'll also look at the chat too, if we need other examples, because we went through some more of those. I think we went through one more. I can do like maybe one around parenting. If you have a child that is maybe engaging in like some delinquent behavior-ish or some externalizing behaviors where they just don't want to listen, one of the first order changes that folks try to make sometimes is like a token system. Like, oh, if you engage in good behaviors, then you'll get stars. And at the end of that, that's the first order change. That doesn't really change the way that the family system is relating to each other, but it's something that kind of helps the problem in the short term. But making a second order change would be then changing the way that that parent and that child interact with each other. Is it something that's happening in that parent's life where they're treating this child as maybe an adult, but then taking the power away from them? So now they're not listening because they're trying to take their power back. So that would be like a second order change, just trying to change the way that the parent and the child are interacting with each other. A third order change would be looking at now this parent and child dynamics put into this cultural system. Why is this parent giving this child more responsibility? Is it because that there might be some issues around poverty? Could be something around the way that the family's culture looks at the family-child relationship. So that's like those different levels of first and second order change. You're so welcome. Yes, educational leadership. What may seem like first order, second order to someone else based on the, so yeah, and I think that's the thing. So when we're talking about the first and second and third order change, we then start with your homeostasis, and your homeostasis may be different for everyone. And like we said earlier, that our homeostasis was starting at a 23. Somebody's homeostasis and their norm and their way of being may be at like a 40 something. So then their first, second, and third order change will look very different. So even if you are at like 70 degrees, you could still engage in behaviors in your organization that only keep you at 70 degrees. And what are you doing to move the company to being, again, more culturally informed? Oh, spirituality is part of culture. And so spirituality plays a part in all of what we do. And I think part of that is asking people about their cultural experiences and how that can play a part in the way that you all are interacting with each other. I know we only have like 2 minutes left. Ty, did you want to talk a little bit about the cultural genogram?
Sure. And I guess, well, I'm sorry, I cannot see the chat. So because my initial question is, do we have an idea of what your baseline genogram looks like? The person respond. But if you have an idea of what your baseline genogram looks like, it looks something similar to that. So whereas you're collecting dates and behaviors, the connections of families, we're also starting to look at culture. Okay, so diversity wise, okay, what culture does this person represent? Race, ethnicity, spirituality, religion is a really big thing for some folks. And so being able to bring that into, and then what was the culture of the house? So even what are some of the rules? We can break it culture down so far to say, okay, what were the rules and roles that were in your house versus, okay, your cousin? What did that look like? So then what did it look like when you two got together? How was that? And we do that a lot with coupling. And it's a tool that can be used, the intake or like the second session, as you're doing more of that information gathering on who the client is. It really allows you just to get a little bit more information about who they are. A brief excerpt of their lived experiences and guide it, use it as a guiding tool to delve into it deeper. And if it's helpful, I can send a link for a cultural genogram.
And to the question in there about the supervisors, again, that's why the social location is very important, because you can have people that are of your same racial or ethnic background that are also sexist, that are also classist, that are also transphobic and homophobic. And that's why that social location. And that's why we really encourage leaders to come to things like this so they can make those changes, because they then have the power to make the changes in the organization. And you all will be receiving some resources, so books and journal articles that you can read to help some of this, more description of what it means to be socially, culturally attuned, and some questions that you can then ask yourself, because again, it's the abstract to the concrete, and sometimes we really have to get into the abstract. We're asking yourself some questions to help you be more culturally informed. So thank you all again.
Drs. Harris McCoy and Strawn Louidor, I got this. I knew it was going to get me eventually. This was really fascinating. I think we've seen it in the chat, but I would like to reiterate that we really appreciate both the theory and the concept, but the really concrete way that you provided some case studies and some concrete examples, and then spent this last hour and a half sort of layering the individual to the leader to the organization, because each of those elements is really important to this discussion. For everybody who is still with us, there is a survey link in the chat. We do really appreciate your feedback. It is how we plan our training, and that is also where you will find your certificate of attendance. In addition, as we noted at the beginning of this training, you will be receiving a follow-up message in the next 2 days. And as Dr. Harris McCoy noted, it will have the recording, the slides, the personal values worksheet, and a few other resources as well. So we would be delighted if you take a moment to fill out that survey, and we very much appreciate that you all joined us today. We really appreciate your time. We love having you participate in Caltrin training. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. And if you are joining us at noon for the kickoff of the 2023 Child, Family, and Community Wellbeing Series, I look forward to seeing you in just a little while. Thanks so much, everyone.